Scott Summers is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most misunderstood members of the Marvel Universe. Seen by a vast majority of fans as the vanilla-flavored X-Man, there really isn't a lot of love for the One-Eyed Wonder, and that's kind of a shame. Peel away the layers and what lies underneath is one of the more complex characters to ever fall from the minds of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. He spent the last half of a century pretty much carrying the team on his back, always being the one to make the toughest choices whenever the situation arises. So with that in mind, I'm Will for What Culture, back from petitioning for Squirrel Girl's long overdue entrance into the MCU to bring you 10 things everyone always gets wrong about Cyclops. Number 10. He's a bad leader. It's a common misconception that Cyclops isn't very good at his job. It's safe to say that that particular idea is way off the mark. Being one of the original members of Professor X's dream team, he's had to shoulder the responsibility as their leader during some of the most traumatic events in their history. Through the likes of Onslaught, Age of Apocalypse, and Civil War, the One-Eyed Wonder has been the cornerstone of the squad, holding them together and, inevitably, leading them to victory. Most of the time. How many heroes could continually manage to save the day when everything else around them is falling apart? How many times has he had to perform such miracles when he's either been A, mourning the death of Jean, or B, coming to terms with the fact that she's alive again? All things considered, he does a bloody good job. Number 9. He only has eyes for Jean. It's safe to say that Scott Summers and Jean Grey have been through a lot since they first became an item. This seems mainly to be down to Jean making death and resurrection a hobby, but it's safe to say that this power couple always beats the odds, ending up back in each other's arms, eventually. Old Sykes' loyalty and devotion to his wife can never be questioned, surely. Well, Emma Frost, Madeline Pryor, and Betsy Braddock may beg to differ. There is no doubt that for years he only had an eye for his wife, but she wasn't that long in the cold ground before he started looking elsewhere. And yes, it's understandable that Madeline became the object of his affections, what with her having more than a passing resemblance to Jean, but that still doesn't change the fact that another woman could easily turn his head. Then there was the time that Psylocke turned his head as she tried time and time again to seduce him for her own amusement, and even though he didn't act upon it, he sure was tempted. And then there's Emma Frost, who he had a psychic affair with in New X-Men. Emma and Summers have been quite the couple since the start of the millennium, proving that Jean and Cyclops aren't as synonymous as it may seem. Number 8. He has no interests outside the X-Men. Scott Summers is the poster boy for Professor X's dream. From day one, he's led the team and been a company man no matter what happens, and this dedication to the cause has left him little time for anything else. Except for when he worked as a fisherman, or the time he took a job as a DJ in a nightclub. In the fledgling days of the comic, the X-Men are forced to disband by the FBI. This leads to them having to take ordinary day jobs. Marvel Girl became a model because, of course she did, and Slim, the man who is allegedly as interesting as plain rice, became a DJ. Needless to say, if the thought of him dropping fat beats doesn't fill you with glee, then there's no hope for you. Number 7. He's a one-trick pony. With optic beams that could skin a chicken from 300 yards, Cyclops' mutant ability is pretty damn strong, but according to some sections of the fandom, that's all he's got going for him, which is just trash. Sure, he might not be able to move things with his mind or have a shiny metal skeleton to go along with some funky healing factor, but to suggest that he has nothing more in his locker is really missing the point. For years, he's been fine-tuned into a perfect weapon, with thousands of hours of training under his belt to help improve his strength, his reflexes, and his mind, to the point where he knows his opponent's move before they do. He also has an uncanny ability to be able to read any situation the X-Men find themselves in and then be willing to change the battlefield plan on the fly, thus giving them the best chance at success. Add all these ingredients together and he has more strings to his bow than all of Marvel and DC's archers put together. Number 6. He's not that powerful. He literally hits Juggernaut with enough force to tear a small planet in half. Yeah, he's hella strong. Next. Number 5. He's boring. So it's time to talk about the elephant in the room. Scott Summers is as dull as a dishwasher. As boring as a tick to the brain, there is no possible way he could be anything less than a button-down square. Except that when X-Men first debuted, he was considered the cool member of the group. Now, he didn't really have to do a lot to take that initial mantle, considering the company he was in, but the fact remains that Cyclops was the hip representation of 60s culture at the time. Remember, at this point, there were no true anti-heroes. Wolverine hadn't even been created, but as the times changed and fans demanded more from their heroes and villains, Cyclops' ways would seem a bit outdated, but that was more a fault of the writers than anything else. He just got lost in the shuffle. Fortunately, after Joss Whedon's brilliant run with Astonishing X-Men, Scott was allowed more room to breathe and proved that not only was he not boring, but quite funny as well. Number 4, he'd get his ass kicked by any of the other X-Men. Ever since the ink dried on the first issue of Uncanny X-Men, fans have wondered who'd win in a fight between Marvel's mutant team. The question has been asked over and over again across the internet, and though the general consensus always seems to be Logan, it may come as a surprise that Cyclops already proved everyone wrong back in issue 127. After they had their collective asses handed to them by Proteus, Scott realized the team needed to get their heads back in the game. And how did he go about achieving this? Simple. He started a fight with Nightcrawler, Storm, and Wolverine. Having thrown a cup of coffee in Wolvie's face, it didn't take long for it to be on, and even though the rumble only lasted the grand total of 4 pages, it made it clear that, when push comes to shove, Slim would easily be able to take down his teammates. Not only had he studied each villain they had come across, he'd also used the same technique on his compatriots, meaning he knew exactly how to take them down, Batman style. Number 3, he's always been a good guy. Being one of the first students at the Xavier Institute, Scott has spent years having the mantra of humans and mutants living in harmony drummed into him. Under the guidance of Charles, his sense of right and wrong is pretty much set in stone. He knows what is expected of him, and that is to fight the good fight. Yet, underneath all that, there's always been a vein of bad blood running through him. After the House of M saga, this side of him comes further into the fore, culminating in a head-on battle with the Avengers that sees him arrested and thrown in jail. He's eventually broken out by Magneto of all people, and goes on to lead his version of the X-Men almost like a mutant militia. Number 2, he's not a killer. Unless your name is Logan, killing the hell out of your opponents is usually frowned upon in the X-Men. It is something that's only ever used as a last resort, and something that is never taken lightly. And yet, with a body count that's in the double figures, it seems that nobody bothers to inform Cyclops about this. He is almost responsible for more deaths than the Legacy virus, even going so far as to use a mutated version of the disease to wipe out a legion of Skrulls during Secret Invasion. He's taken out Kandra of the Externals, Ghoul, Ugly John, and that's just to name 3 on Earth 616. If you add them all together with the deaths he is responsible for on alternative worlds, Slim's up there with Hannibal Lecter in terms of villain status. Number 1, he's an annoying goody two-shoes Boy Scout. Scott Summers is far from the good Boy Scout that most fans seem to think he is. He's a highly trained weapon with no qualms about using excessive violence, a man and a mutant who will do whatever it takes to achieve his long-term goals, even at the cost of those closest to him. During the final battle in Avengers vs. X-Men, a Phoenix Force-infused Cyclops fights Professor X. There is a certain inevitability about this confrontation, as Scott's building resentment towards humans puts him at loggerheads with Charles, and after decades of mentorship, this strange father-son dynamic comes to a tragic conclusion. As Charles screams "that is enough" at him, Cyclops simply replies, "it is," before killing him. And as easily as that, one of the longest friendships in comic book history is ended in the most brutal of ways. The point here is that no matter what the outside influence of the Phoenix was doing, Scott Summers truly believes what he's doing is for the betterment of his people, and he will do whatever it takes to secure their survival at any cost. By and large, he's a good guy, but he sure as hell isn't a Boy Scout.